What it started with is, I guess, what we now call grooming. I was in 5th grade. I was not a popular kid. I did not have a lot of friends. I was often eating alone. And I started to get an incredible amount of positive attention from a male teacher who would tell me how smart I was, how great I was, give me extensions on homework, give me small treats, share a chocolate at lunch or offer a soda, tell me how much better I was than other kids, why they didn't understand me. And so really establishing a base of friendship. And it turned into a situation where he was often asking in a way that let me know it was a command for me to stay back and spend time with him alone at lunch. He would do things like rub my back and shoulders, rub my head. I mean, at this point, I was a prepubescent. I was 11 years old. This was an extremely stark case of someone with an inappropriate interest in a child. It started to get me really teased in class because I started to be thought of as the favorite. When I would make the decision to not spend time with him, oh, hey, I'm actually gonna go out to recess or eat my lunch in the library, he would become angry, he would chastise me, he would punish me by forcing me to get up in front of the class and give an answer to a question that we hadn't necessarily studied. There were consequences to my actions if I did not comply and give him the kind of attention and affection that he wanted. When I finally went to my mother to talk to her about it, it was because I had $1 that my mom had given me, like, for the soda machine. So I was sitting in class playing with my dollar, and he took it from me. He said, "That's distracting. Get that from me after class." And I went up to him after class and I said, "Can I have my dollar back?" And he stuffed it down his undershirt and said, "Come and get it." And I said, "I don't want to. I will never forget." As clear as day, he said, "You're all talk, but when it comes to action." And I just walked out of the room. I walked home. I told my mother, and my mother went in kept me home from school the next day, went in to talk to the principal, and there were about 2 weeks left in the school year. She pulled me out of school for the rest of the year. What I had experienced was deeply inappropriate and invasive. And it was—
And was headed towards sexual abuse, no question.
And was headed towards sexual abuse. It's somebody who I later learned was a serial offender. I was not the only child who was made uncomfortable by this teacher. I was just lucky that my mother was there to protect me.
Yes.
How could fear be a gift? Well, it is.
These feelings are gifts. They're not things we should ignore.
The gift of fear is a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a PhD all rolled into one.
The #1 parental fear is that children will be kidnapped by a stranger. And yet it is simply not one of the things that human beings do very often. Other kinds of child napping, like the father who comes back and takes the kids because he doesn't have custody, those are far more common. However, out of nearly 70 million American children, fewer than 100 a year are provably kidnapped by strangers, and most of those are returned very quickly. Meaning a real kidnapping where somebody is kidnapped and taken away for a long time is an extraordinarily rare event. A child is actually far more likely to have a heart attack. And child heart attacks are so rare that most of us correctly never think about it. Go ahead.
It's such a relief to get parents to focus on what is happening rather than worrying and speculating about what might happen.
It's true. And the irony is that people are more interested in speculating about these kinds of fears, my baby being kidnapped, my child being kidnapped by a stranger, because we've been programmed to think that these are the things to be worried about. I want to talk for a minute about reality. We've done a lot here together about real things that have happened to you, to me, to others, statistics, really looking right at the stuff. And when you're willing to look right at it, then you can actually set it aside. You can say, all right, I know what that looks like, I'm done with that now. Whereas when you don't know what it looks like, you go to denial. You say, oh yeah, I've heard about that, but that's only for people in the inner city. Or, those terrible things happen to kids, but my kids are too young. A denier says sexual abuse is an enormous problem, particularly for young teens. Thank God mine aren't there yet. And reality says, no, I'm sorry, the most common age at which sexual abuse begins is 3. The denier says, well, sure, if you have homosexuals around small children, and reality says, no, sorry, nearly 100% of sexual abuse is committed by heterosexual men. Yeah, but that kind of pervert isn't living in our neighborhood, says the denier. Reality says, sorry, that kind of pervert is living in your neighborhood. U.S. Department of Justice estimates that on average there's 1 child molester per square mile in the United States. Yeah, but at least the police know where these people are, the denier says. Not likely, says reality, since the average child molester victimizes between 30 and 60 people before he's ever arrested. And anyway, when he is arrested, there's a whole group of deniers there saying, but he was such a nice man. When all of these defenses against reality are taken away, the denier switches to resignation, which is literally resigning from responsibility. And they say, well, there's nothing you can do about it anyway. And that misplaced fatalism becomes fatal for some children. And in those cases, deniers sing what I call the ever-popular hit single, How Could I Have Known? When the way they could have known is by learning about the reality of human behavior.
I'm a retired school teacher and I'm a mother of 8 children. I have a great interest in my grandchildren learning the things you're teaching us, and the word needs to get out. Could you talk about how we would protect children that are not going to be looking for danger signals unless we show them how to do it?
I don't believe that 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds have anything to do with their own safety. Nothing. You couldn't put a goldfish in their care and expect it to be all right. You certainly can't put them, a 5-year-old in their care and expect them to be all right. So the idea, for example, that we teach children never talk to strangers is something I oppose. Let's imagine a child is lost in public and is looking to reconnect with his mother or father. What's the one resource that he or she will need? The ability to talk to strangers. Right. A lot of parents are teaching, go to the police officer. Well, there is no police officer. There's no. When was the last time you needed a police officer who happened to be 4 feet away? That's not how it works. The other thing is that when we say never talk to strangers, we also show them the very same day that we violate the rule. For example, we say to them, say hello to the nice stranger in the supermarket. This is just somebody handing out samples. Say hello to the nice clown. And then we are talking to strangers in front of them all the time. So it's just not a true practice. Mm-hmm. The problem with never talk to strangers is that parents then come to believe that if they drill that into their kids, that somehow equates to safety, when the reality is for kids of a certain age, they simply cannot be on their own in any environment. There's a far better teaching for use in the event that a child is lost in public, for example, which can happen. They get separated, of course, from parents all the time. And that is go to a woman. Mm-hmm. You teach a child, a small kid, like I have a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, and both know in public to go to a woman. I don't believe in a lot of golden rules, but for me that is one of them, because the possibility that your child selects a woman and that woman turns out to be some kind of sinister predator, the odds are just microscopic, vanishingly low. And then be able to be comfortable with talking to strangers. The reality is that the overwhelming majority of people our kids meet are kind to our kids or have no interest, one of the two. And it's not strangers that's the issue. Right. It's strangeness that's the issue. In other words, it's teaching our kids, how did you feel about that encounter? I wrote a book called Protecting the Gift that you may have that's all about this, just about protecting kids. And there's a woman I interviewed there who taught her young son to, whenever he wanted something, let's say he wanted a hot dog, she would say, well, go ask somebody where we can get a hot dog near here. Go ask somebody what time it is. And she would stand back a good distance and watch her little 5-year-old son go up and select somebody in public and ask a question. And then when he came back, she would say, how'd you feel about that person? He'd say, I didn't feel comfortable with that person, or I like that person, nice guy. So you're teaching them to listen to their own signals. Now, their signals are not very good at 4 and 5 years old, and that they don't really understand predation. But everybody here who's a parent knows that our kids liked some people and just didn't like some people. Mm-hmm. And so one of the worst things you could do is say to them, I don't care about your feeling. You kiss Aunt Emma again. You let him pinch your cheek. You get on his lap. You get in the car with him because he's your uncle or he's our friend. And discounting. What I do with my son is I lean in and I say, what is it? You know, what is it that you don't like about him? That's interesting. I hear you, I get it. And never compel them to stay in somebody's environment that they don't like. And give it some patience, give it some time. They may come around to liking that person or they may not. Never talk to strangers is a relic that I'd like to see forgotten about. And, you know, and in terms of their safety at a young age, it's really our responsibility. Where do we put them? Who do we put them with? What's the environment? What's the circumstance?
I love what you say in Protecting the Gift about getting young children especially used to being able to evaluate people with you. It's a great skill and also, frankly, a really nice way to talk to and learn more about your children because it's very difficult, as you know, to ask your kid, how is your day? What are you feeling? But when you talk about a third party, did you like that person? Was that person weird? Why did you want to talk to that person? Why did you not want to talk to the person? You learn a lot about them as well as the person.
Well, it's really a great thing because you're teaching them by asking that their answers matter, that how they feel about somebody matters. I'm really encouraging parents to teach their kids to make very slow decisions about whom you include in your life and very fast decisions about whom you exclude in your life.
And that advice lasts your entire life. You have to constantly be reevaluating, you know, constantly kind of putting people through the sifter and figuring out who's left.
I interviewed a group of kids who were 7 years old. It was for something on Good Morning America, where we were trying to demonstrate that kids need to be helped along to tell their parents things. And so I asked these kids, would you tell your parents something that would make them sad? And they all said no. Would you tell your parents something that would make them angry? And they all said yes. They were willing to take on anger, but they weren't willing to be the instrument of causing their parents to be sad. And so teaching kids that you are able as a parent to take on any information. Nothing that my sons tell me is going to knock me to the floor. And they know that. I hope they know it. And I've certainly worked for them to know it. And teaching them to inform us of anything, and teaching them particularly that when someone says, don't tell your parents, this means tell your parents. Yes. That's the exact expression that they're getting. Don't tell your parents means tell your parents. Don't yell means yell. Don't run means run.
As a child, I was sexually abused by a teacher, and my parents knew nothing about it, and I was afraid to tell them.
And you didn't have the vocabulary, and you didn't have the comfort with them. Speaking directly to what you spoke to about child sexual abuse, and we need to teach kids all the correct words, penis, vagina, not woo-woo and wee-wee or whatever they are, and comfort with all of the correct words, and no tittering around the concept of inappropriate touch, and no clear drama around it. Go ahead, Bob.
As Gift of Fear was being written, for the rest of you, my daughter worked for Gavin at the time, and before it was actually published, she said to me, I wished I'd had this in middle school. And I quickly said, what happened in middle school you didn't tell me about?
Right.
You know, so there are things that many times I've learned since now with 10 grandkids that sometimes they're more ready than we think they are. And I've actually been teaching concepts out of all of those books to the grandkids, pieces of it that are appropriate, but sometimes the kids are more ready than you think they are.
Yes, it's a good point.
I wanted to ask Megan's Law and the sites that let us, you know, you can go online and see registered sex offenders in your neighborhood. What should we do about that? I mean, even if, so are we supposed to check them? How often do we check them? I remember checking kind of repeatedly, and it's just, you see all those horrible faces of people who have done these terrible things.
If you believe that knowing that a guy lives at that house who's a sex offender is going to change your conduct in some way about the guys who live in every other house, the bottom line on all of it is that all around us all the time are people who might have sinister ideas, might have a background that would surprise us, and we want to be reacting not to some specific piece of information, because that's static. In a way, it's dead. information. We want to be reacting to what's active and what's alive and what's changing and what's right in front of us. It would be a real shame to have somebody thinking about the guy who's living at 145 Elm Street and then not thinking about the guy who's living at 142 Elm Street, or the person you've hired for something, or the person actually in your child's life. A strategy that I believe in a lot is to make very slow and careful choices about who you admit into your child's life, and very fast choices about whom you exclude. And so getting someone out quickly is a key component of this when you have that feeling. I want to talk for a moment about nanny cams in this regard. People ask me often if I think they're a good idea. If your intention is to make yourself feel better that what's going on at home is just what you thought it was, they're fine. But if your intention is to catch a disturbing or damaging conduct, of course, it's a very dangerous experiment, meaning you intuitively feel this child care provider is dangerous. And so you put a camera there to prove your intuition is right rather than just act on your intuition. When I get a call from somebody who says, should we get a nanny cam? I say, no, you should get rid of the nanny who's giving you the concern that you're worried about. And nobody's going to thank you 18 years later or be sitting in their therapist's office explaining the damages they suffered by being sexually molested and say, but my parents have that video, thank God for that. A video of abuse is worth avoiding. Now, there is a use for nanny cams that I think has value, and that is if you want to know that your wishes are being followed, if it adds extra comfort. But remember that somebody putting a camera in the living room and a camera in the kitchen, there's not 15 cameras in their apartment, and they're really leaning forward with every cell in their body and saying, show me the video that it's okay. But you're not really learning about all activity in all rooms. And so if you have a bad feeling about someone and you use a nanny cam to get yourself out of that bad feeling, you are ignoring intuition, not acting on intuition. And then you're saying, oh, good, there's 10 minutes of good video, so everything's all right. Now, there have been people caught on video. I did an Oprah show years ago where there was a woman who was caught hitting a kid with a spoon by a nanny cam, and she was prosecuted by that. But I look at the two outcomes. Which would I prefer? That she'd been fired because of the parents' intuition, or that there's a story to tell on Oprah and to show to prosecutors? It's basically a high-stakes experiment I wouldn't do with my kids. Go ahead.
We had a case in Florida that really talks about listening to your intuition. A dad would go to a bakery with his son every Sunday, kind of a tradition, and the gentleman behind the counter would befriend, just like at our local supermarket where they give you a cookie. So far, we're all good. Over the weeks, as he was going every week, the gentleman behind the counter started saying to the little boy, hey, come over back here, you can frost a cupcake, come, let me show you the big mixing bowl. And each week, he would separate him from his father. And the father, bless him, had intuition, just had that gut feeling. So he asked the gentleman who owns the bakery, can you tell me the guy's name? And he did. He went home, he Googled it on that registry that you're talking about, and lo and behold, there he is. He's an offender. He's a transplant. Florida gets a lot of transplants, and he's also an ex-clergy. And he was definitely, in the process of grooming that child.
Yes.
And I was so impressed with his father's level of intuition.
If gift of fear is about anything, it's about personal accountability. It's about you're going to be the one responsible for your safety and not rely on a corporation or a security company or a government agency or a police department to do it for you.
It really struck me when you were talking about pay attention to the signs in the moment instead of all the fears and anxieties. If my mother had just thought, I wonder why that band director brings her home after school all by herself, you would think she would have had a gut feeling there's something the matter here. But she always thought, oh, isn't it nice of him to help her with her clarinet? Isn't he a handsome man? And that really got to me, just thinking, just look for the signs in the moment, just as you're telling us. Look at what's happening right now. And if it gives you an odd feeling, act on it, do something about it.
And usually you don't even have to look, because intuition will come and tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, there's something more to learn here.
Yeah, you're right.
Yes.
Okay, so I have a situation where the kid wants to walk all over by himself and explore and go to home from school to home and all of that. But it's not that he's incapable. He can do all of those things. I just find it very strange when I'm out and about seeing children alone on the street. And so I don't want to give the creeps around the opportunity to see my child walking alone on the street. I just don't want to do it. So I say no.
There's a chapter in Protecting the Gift called The Changing of the Guard. And this talks about that time when responsibility for a child's safety passes from the parent to the child. And that age is not a number because it depends on the particular child, the particular parent, and also the particular environment where the child lives. If you're living in the projects in Chicago, that might be a tougher place to be running around at 11 years old than living in a nicer neighborhood. But all of these things get taken into consideration. How old is he, by the way?
12, and part of it is because, back in the 60s, we were able to just roam around all over by ourselves. And
what do you think changed? Because
society, I think.
Sexual predation didn't change at all. That's part of human beings. It's got nothing to do with 1960, 1860, or 2020. That's the same animal.
So I thought society had changed, but you're saying it's always been.
Well, we were talking specifically about sexual predators and child molesters. The same.
The same.
Yeah, unchanged. Guns, that's a different thing. Guns have increased, gang violence has increased, drive-by shootings have increased. These are things, many of them were not happening in the 1960s. But the ways that human beings interact with human beings, for example, here's a stark reality. Adults have sex with children and always have. Right? That's part of human beings. That's not Martians landing and doing it. Those are human beings doing it. So that is part of human behavior. It's not a popular part, it's not a frequent part, it's not an acceptable part or a desirable part, but it is part of it. So yes, that didn't change. There was a USA Today poll that found that 90% of adults today feel less safe than they did growing up. And since your children are very sensitive to your fears, I want to take a look at that safer world of our youth. It was a world without airbags or mandatory seatbelts, before the decrease in smoking, before early detection of cancer, before 911 systems showed dispatchers where you're calling from. You remember those carefree 50s, before CAT scans, ultrasound, organ transplant, amniocentesis, when angry world powers postured against each other, and I would get down underneath the desk every first Friday of every month when there were air raid shelters. So the fact is now that young people are more likely to survive childhood today than they were in 1960. Vehicle fatalities have dropped by 25% since then. Death by other accidents has been cut in half. Cancer deaths have been reduced 30%. And it's true that the violence we see today is far more gruesome than we saw growing up. But that's my point, the violence we see. Human beings didn't change, not for thousands of years, not for millions of years. This is what we are. And what changes is our view as a society of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Because we made it through, we think that it's all right. But indeed, we all went through those times, and many of us had experiences that we wouldn't want our kids to have, myself included. Your childhood is a good example. You experienced things that you don't want your son to experience. True story?
Yes, of course.
Right. And so the question then is the balance between our programming our fears into our kids. A friend of mine said a great thing to me. She said, your sons don't know your story. Don't teach it to them.
Oh, okay.
Right? When they're old enough, we sit down and I'll say, hey, this is your dad's life. But to teach a 4-year-old to be wary of adults beating him, for example, when that's not his reality, it wouldn't make sense. And so I'm not saying it's easy at all. It's to take our pre-programmed fears from our own experience and then to take the programmed fears that are given to us by TV news producers and the news media and balance it all against the reality of your son's capabilities in a situation in which he would be uncomfortable, unless there's something inherently unsafe about the neighborhood. And should he be ready right now? No, he should be ready when he's ready. These are things that you'll feel comfortable. For example, if I visited your house and I said I want to take a walk around the neighborhood, you'd say okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So he will come to an age where the changing of the guard is right for him. He will come to an age where he too can make you comfortable about him walking around the neighborhood. Go ahead.
So we mentioned previously about the importance of it, parents just having these conversations in a healthy, ongoing manner with our kids. So you brought up a memory for me, because my son, who is now 15, I really struggled with letting him go in the neighborhood, letting him go, period. Because of my history, also we had just moved, so we're in a new neighborhood that I wasn't familiar with, and I wasn't even familiar with my neighbors yet. And I knew that when my new job started, when the school year was starting, it was now summer, I was going to be leaving him home alone in the house, going against pretty much everything I believed in as a parent, okay? And letting him get himself up in the morning, get himself out of the house, lock the house, okay? That's a big deal. You're laughing, big deal. And then walking to the bus stop alone. I mean, nothing was lining up, and safety-wise, because I used that checklist. And what I ended up doing was having ongoing conversations. I said, okay, sure, you have 2 months to work with this kid to prepare him for this new journey. And we practice. We would practice. Once he even started school, we had already done a bunch of dry runs. But when he started school, he would literally stay on the phone with me. Okay, now I'm making my oatmeal. Now I'm going into the garage. I'm pressing the button. And then I would walk with him to the bus stop. And then eventually, he was able to start doing that by himself. And then he'd text me, I'm here, I'm with the other kids. I look back at it and I think, oh my God, that was such a great way to go about empowering him with this responsibility.
Sure. You know, just as and you've seen it yourself, I know, just as a mother cat teaches the kittens how to fight through play in the beginning, and just as we teach our kids how to swim, which is a very rare thing for most people, given that we're human beings, we're not usually in the water, but teaching our kids how to register their feelings and honor them, teaching our kids what the signs are that ought to make them uncomfortable, teaching our kids what their resources are. For example, I have a friend who walked the route between the house and the school with her son many, many times, and they met people on the route in shops who they identified as people that they befriended. And if my kid ever needs anything, can he come in here? Absolutely, says the manager of this store or the woman who runs such and such. So that they'd made the trip so many times, and they did alternate routes in case there was construction going on a particular route, or in case the kid felt uncomfortable walking down that street, he could back up and take the other route to school that day. The point is preparing. I'm not saying it's easy at all. I remember the first time I took my 5-year-old son to go riding at a stable, and it was a place where they accept 5-year-olds and you leave them. And I sat in the car and cried. I was having a really difficult time leaving. Of course, the letting go. Look, human beings are not built for it, period. It's a very confounding animal that we are so invested in attachment and we are so bad at letting go. It's just the nature of it. And of course, your responsibility is your children, and it's natural that the immediate place we go is thinking about our experiences as a child. But he's different than you. He didn't have your childhood. He's a different person, and he is going to continue to grow and learn in some of the ways that we've just talked about. He has to demonstrate to you that he's ready, and you have to demonstrate to him that he has all the skills that he needs. So people think in terms of 12 years old being a magic age at which kids would somehow be able to walk around the neighborhood or what have you. For some kids that might be 10 years old, and for some kids that might be 15 years old. There's no magic age. The thing to answer are these 12 questions. Do your children know how to honor their feelings? If someone makes them uncomfortable, that's an important signal. Do your children know that you are strong enough to hear about any experience they've had, and that they will come and tell you no matter how unpleasant it is? Do your kids know that it's okay to rebuff and defy adults? Do they know that it's okay to be assertive? Do they know how to ask for assistance or help? Do they know how to choose who to ask? Do they know how to describe their situation to someone? How to say, I'm lost, or that guy's bothering me? Do they know that it's okay to strike, even to injure somebody if they believe they're in danger? And that you'll support that action no matter what they do? Do they know that it's okay to make noise, to scream, to yell, to run? Do they know that if someone ever tries to force them to go somewhere, that they can scream, "This is not my father"? Because onlookers, seeing a child scream or even struggle, are often assuming that it's a kid who's acting disruptively with their own parent. Do they know that if someone says don't yell, the thing to do is yell? If someone says don't tell, the thing to do is tell? And do they know to fully resist ever going anywhere out of public view with somebody, particularly someone who tries to persuade them? So that's 12 questions to ask. And if the answer to all of those is yes, then I think your kid can take a walk in the neighborhood. What I hear from you is you're not ready for your son to go walking around alone. And that's the only thing you need to hear. You do not need to build a case, because you're talking about the bad guys, the creepy guys, and not giving them an opportunity. Nothing to do with them. You can't control them. We're powerless about all of that. It's your son that you don't feel is ready. If you feel that he's ready to deal with an approach in public, or he knows how to resist, or he knows that it's all right to scream and say no, or he knows that it's all right to run away, or he would always come and tell you about any encounter he's had, when you feel that, and you will, then it's time for the changing of the guard. And no thinking about what strangers will do, because you don't have any information to assess people you don't even know. If you have a particular person, that's a different animal. But just the idea that someone will victimize him, it's not accurate, but you don't feel ready yet for him at the age he is. A parent knows best what's right for a child in terms of safety. If you have the feeling, then that's the thing that has to be listened to. And you don't have to explain it to anybody. And least of all, you don't have to explain it to yourself. You don't have to persuade yourself about why you feel that way and should you feel that way. There's no should in it. It just is.
Right.